So over the weekend, I continued to read In Defense of Ska by Carnes, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I got out of this book, or what I'm getting out of this book. And I got to say, last time I talked about it, I talked about how I liked it, but I could definitely see how Aaron Carnes and I are different. Me having grown up more in the Christian rock scene and the pop punk scene, and that being my connection to ska, and him having grown up more in the DIY punk scene, and going to clubs like Gilman Street and that kind of stuff. So there's definitely a difference there. But in these chapters, I was able to see a lot more of our similarities, like how we connect more, how we're the same more. So, for instance, there's this chapter here called One Step Beyond. And in this chapter, it talks a lot about him seeing Skank and Pickle and the experience that seeing Skank and Pickle had for him. And I can remember concerts that had that kind of an impact on me, where I felt for a moment, and that's what's so magical about music, right, is you feel for a moment like you sort of exist outside of space and time, like you are 100% in that moment. It's what they're talking about in the book. What's the name of that book? Shoot. I'm not going to remember right now. But it's I swear in that moment we were infinite, right? It's going to drive me crazy. Hold on. The perks of being a wallflower. Goodness gracious. And the perks of being a wallflower. Those moments when you feel infinite. I've felt a lot of those at concerts. And the concert that he was at to see Skank and Pickle, it felt like one of those moments. Just completely lost in time to the energy of that moment. And I could connect to that and relate to that on a deep and personal level. So it was really cool to see, sort of the experience he had where Skank and Pickle impacted him. So from that chapter, it kind of goes into trying to back up into it a little bit. And I will say there are some kind of weird, just a small negative thing, but there are some kind of weird spots where there's like a gap in the page because there's a picture coming up. So there's some, formatting things that I think were difficult because there's a lot of photography and original artwork and posters and stuff in here. But it's so worth it to see that sort of history of the posters and the artwork and all that. So the next chapter is a chapter about Fat Randy. And so this is talking about the Voodoo Glow Skulls a lot and about this dude named Fat Randy, who was part of a song that they wrote. And it kind of tells the story of them trying to shoot the video for Fat Randy. And it's funny. It's kind of gross, but it's funny. So I enjoyed that chapter. You read chapters like that and you're like, man, I'm getting history here. And there probably are not a ton of people that know these stories that Aaron's sharing. And so you feel like, especially if you were not 100% invested in the scene back then, you feel like you're getting a front row seat to some of these things, which is pretty cool. So there's a chapter called Designated Ska Friend, and that chapter talks about Brent Lawrence Freeman and Jeremy Andrew Hunter, which both of those guys are in We Are the Union. Brent's the drummer, Jeremy's the trombonist. Jeremy is also the trombone. Well, he's Ska Tune Network, so he does all the music for Ska Tune Network, and he also does music under the name Jer. But it kind of talks about how if you're the dude that's into ska, how everybody wants to send everything ska related to you, and how that can kind of get a little annoying. But at the same time, you also kind of love it, and how you feel the need to defend ska all the time because you love ska so much. And that was a pretty fun chapter to read. I knew there was a chapter about those guys in here. Every interaction I've had, I haven't had any personal interactions with Jeremy, but I've had some personal interactions with Brent, just small ones, and every interaction I've had, he's been a very nice guy, a good guy, and definitely a champion for music. And We Are the Union is awesome. And I'm so excited. I've got their new album pre-ordered. Can't wait for it. So then there's a chapter here called Synth Pop Festival, and it kind of tells the story of Aaron's band Flat Planet, kind of the touring and ending up playing at this festival where it was like everybody was like Depeche Mode wannabes, and how they kind of won the crowd over, which is pretty fun. It's hard to be at a ska show and not enjoy it. There's a chapter called Book Your Own Life. I'm skipping a word there, an expletive. But this kind of tells the story about how people started sort of touring these DIY tours. And essentially this woman started booking a lot of like her friends' bands and stuff like that. And it was so successful that other people were coming to her trying to get her to book the tours for them, and she wouldn't do it. And so she ended up, finally she started doing some of those guys, but she only wanted to do it for the love of music and not for money. And eventually she ended up creating a book to help people kind of book their own lives at these, and playing all different kinds of venues. But, they were playing like garages and backyards and warehouses and stuff like that. But it was kind of like that. There's also more about Skink and Pickle in here. You can definitely tell that Skink and Pickle is a band that has had a deep and personal impact on Aaron, which is pretty cool. As you start reading through these chapters now, you start to get more and more history. Like here we got the history of Dill Records. We've got how like some of the bands kind of came to be. There's this, interesting part about the beginning of Suicide Machines and basically how they were kind of like purposefully jerks to people because they didn't want to sort of conform. It talks a lot about that difficulty, and this is something you see in the punk scene too. If you grew up listening to like Green Day and East Bay punk and the kind of punk that I grew up listening to as well, that fine line that you're trying to draw between like making money off your music so you can survive and do what you love and play more shows and that kind of stuff, and not selling out, and so staying true to yourself. And so it deals a lot with that sort of challenge. And then it goes into a chapter called Defending Real Big Fish, which is a really good chapter, I think, because a lot of people kind of blame the cheesiness of ska on Real Big Fish, but Real Big Fish is awesome. They make great music. If you haven't listened to their newest album, Life Sucks, Let's Dance, so good. And he kind of talks about how a lot of times the lyrics are a lot more serious, a lot deeper, a lot darker than the fun music makes it sound, which is pretty cool. He kind of goes on this rant in this next chapter called The Fourth Wave about how he's annoyed by people saying, oh, the fourth wave of ska is coming, or the fourth wave of ska is here. Because really, the third wave, each wave is sort of indicated change, right? Like the first wave was just original ska, but the second wave was kind of mixing that with British punk, right? The third wave was sort of mixing that with US punk. But even with the term third wave, he has some issues with that, because it makes it sound like it rose and fell, and it hasn't. He's basically talks about a lot of the bands have still been kind of doing their things. And then he goes into this chapter, this really crazy story called Once Upon a Time in Riverside, that talks about how like Let's Go Bowling got shot when they were on tour, which is crazy. And so this is really a mix of like a lot of anecdotes, history. It's a fun book, and I'm about 102 pages in, and overall the book, if you exclude sort of like the bibliographies and stuff in the back, overall the book is really about 295 pages. This is definitely one I'm super glad I have. I'm a hardcover lover, so I kind of wish there was a hardcover, but I love this book, and I'm glad to have it on my shelf, and I'm going to keep it there forever, man. So far, Aaron, you're doing a great job. I can't wait to keep reading it. If you haven't picked up this book yet, order it from Crash Books, order it from your favorite local bookstore. Ask them to order it to kind of get it on their radar so they can keep stocking it. Order it from Barnes & Noble, order it from Amazon. Just get yourself a copy of this book and pick it up.